Welcome to Life Stories. In today's story, we delve into the life of a woman who has spent years supporting her family, only to be betrayed when her parents leave everything to her younger siblings. Struggling with heartbreak and rejection, she embarks on a journey of self-discovery, learning that sometimes, the greatest act of love is to walk away and reclaim your own happiness. This is a story of strength, independence, and the painful but liberating choice to put yourself first. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to begin today's story. It was supposed to be a typical family dinner. Mom had promised to make her famous homemade lasagna, the kind that always made me feel like I was coming home after being away for too long. The smell of garlic, marinara sauce, and freshly baked pasta filled the air as I sat at the dining table. Just as I had so many times before. But as soon as I took my seat across from my younger siblings, Matt and Lisa, I knew something was different. The mood was heavy in a way that wasn't typical for our family. I didn't expect the punch to come so quickly. In fact, I wasn't prepared for it at all. My brother, Matt, leaned forward across the polished wooden table, his voice thick with arrogance. He stared at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "We wanted you to know now, Emily, so there's no confusion later," he said. The words hung in the air, unnerving me before they even fully registered. "Everything goes to us." The world seemed to tilt. The words hit me like a sucker punch. And suddenly, the lasagna on my plate felt as though it weighed 100 pounds. I pushed it aside, feeling the tightness in my chest, the panic creeping up from my stomach to my throat. My eyes flicked to Lisa, my twin sister, and she was staring at me with a look of smug satisfaction. Clearly enjoying my discomfort, it made my blood boil. How could they be so cold? So indifferent to everything I had done for this family? My mind raced. What did they mean by everything? The house? The lake cottage? The farm? The life I had helped keep afloat for years? I struggled to swallow the lump in my throat, trying to steady my voice as I looked at my mother, then my father, hoping for some sign that this was all a joke. "Excuse me?" I finally managed, the words trembling from my lips. Mom, sitting beside Dad, cleared her throat sharply and interjected before Matt could say another word. Her face was set in a hard expression I had never seen before. A mixture of defiance and resignation. It felt like a slap. The way her face had turned cold toward me, as if I were a stranger. "Your father and I have decided to finalize our will, Emily," she said, her voice betraying no hint of warmth. "We wanted you to hear it directly from us." I looked at her, desperately searching for some sign that she didn't truly mean what she was saying. But her eyes avoided mine, shifting instead to the silverware in front of her as if the weight of my gaze was too much to bear. It felt like everything inside me was crumbling as she continued. "The house, the lake cottage, all of it, it's going to Matt and Lisa." The words echoed in my head, each one landing harder than the last. My mind raced through the years of sacrifice, of sleepless nights spent juggling bills, loans, tuition fees, and repairs. So much time and effort poured into this family without a second thought. And now, everything I had done, everything I had given, meant nothing. It wasn't about family. It was about their convenience, their comfort, and my position as the eldest child who was always expected to pick up the slack. I turned to my father, praying for any kind of sign, anything that would tell me this was some cruel joke, that the world wasn't spinning out of control. But no, he didn't meet my eyes. His gaze was firmly fixed on the table, the silverware in front of him, his fingers tracing the edge of his napkin, as though I didn't exist. "Dad?" I whispered, almost pleading, but his silence spoke volumes. It was like a knife to the heart. If he couldn't even look at me, what did that mean? Had I failed him? Dad finally spoke, his voice low, controlled, but his words sliced deeper than any knife. "Emily," he said, folding his hands in front of him with deliberate slowness, as though this conversation required the utmost caution. "You've done well for yourself. Your mother and I are proud of you. You've built a successful career, a life of your own. But Matt and Lisa, they still need help. They need support. Support. The word hung in the air, poison laced with it. For years, I had been the one to provide that support. I had paid for their house, their education, their living expenses. Every loan I took out was for them. Every paycheck I worked for was to keep them afloat. And now, my reward was to be cast aside. To have everything I had worked for, everything that had kept this family functioning, go to Matt and Lisa. It wasn't fair. It was a betrayal. I've been paying your mortgage, I said, my voice steadying despite the hurt gnawing at me. I've been paying for Liam's tuition, for renovations at the lake house. And now you're telling me you're leaving me nothing? I looked at my mother. I could see the slight twitch of her lips, the tightening of her jaw. She wasn't even going to try to defend herself. Instead, she sighed dramatically, shaking her head in that all too familiar way that made me feel like I was the problem. This is exactly why we didn't want to tell you, she said, her tone dripping with impatience. You always bring it back to money. Emily, it's never about family with you. Anger surged through me. I fought to hold it back. But I could feel my fists clenching beneath the table. How dare she accuse me of not caring about family? Every sacrifice I made, every penny I spent, was because I believed in family. Because I believed that we stuck together through thick and thin. I wasn't the one who had abandoned that idea. They were. It is about family, I shot back, my voice trembling with emotion. Everything I did because I love you. Because you asked me to. You said family sticks together. Liam, ever the smug one, leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a smug grin that made my blood boil. Stop acting like some martyr. Emily, he sneered. Nobody forced you to help. You just liked playing the hero. I turned to Lisa, expecting some form of support. But instead, she laughed, quietly, cruelly, twirling a strand of her glossy hair as she looked at me with a gaze that was both amused and mocking. Maybe you thought if you threw enough money at us, Mom and Dad would finally love you as much as they love us? The words hit like a slap to the face. How had it come to this? The cruelty of their words, their lack of empathy, stung deeper than anything I had ever felt. It cut to the core of everything I had hoped for from this family: love, respect, and recognition. But instead, I was being painted as the villain, the one who had never done enough. The silence that followed was deafening. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I couldn't. The reality of it all was sinking in too deeply. This wasn't just about money. It was about years of neglect, of being used and discarded when it was no longer convenient. And now, they were telling me they had nothing left for me. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind spinning. I didn't belong here anymore. Not in this house. Not in this family. Not when I had given everything and received nothing but cruelty in return. I'm done, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, and walked out of that dining room, away from the home I had worked so hard to keep together. The night air hit me like a slap as I stepped out into the cool evening, leaving the warmth of my parents' house behind. The streetlights flickered above, casting long shadows on the pavement. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders, trying to hold myself together as the sting of rejection settled deep in my chest. The wind cut through me, but it wasn't enough to numb the pain I felt. I could hear the muffled sound of voices behind me, but I didn't look back. I had walked away. I had finally stood up for myself. But now that I was outside, alone in the quiet of the night, a gnawing emptiness crept in. Was I making a mistake? Could I have done more? But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep being the family's emotional and financial crutch. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness for people who would never see me as anything more than a means to an end. As I drove back to my apartment, the silence was overwhelming. The hum of the engine was the only sound as the city passed by in a blur. My thoughts spun in endless circles. I had always believed in family. I had always done everything I could for them. But it was never enough. They didn't want my love or my sacrifices. They wanted my money. And the worst part? They didn't even appreciate it. The tears came when I parked my car, the weight of everything hitting me all at once. I slammed my hands against the steering wheel, wanting to scream, to release the raw emotion that was bubbling inside. I had been used. I had been manipulated. And worse, I had allowed it to happen. For years, I had poured myself into this family, giving up my own dreams, my own needs, all because I believed in the idea of sticking together. But now, I saw it for what it was, a lie. A painful, soul-crushing lie. I didn't know how long I sat there. But eventually, I dragged myself inside, the familiar emptiness of my apartment greeting me like an old friend. My space, once a sanctuary, now felt foreign. The walls, the furniture, even the smell, it all reminded me of what I had just left behind. I wanted to escape it all, to forget everything that had just happened. But I couldn't. I couldn't escape the deep ache in my heart. The first thing I did was pour myself a glass of wine, something strong. Something to dull the sharp pain in my chest. As I sat on the couch, my phone buzzed. I didn't have to look to know it was them. Mom. Dad. Probably Liam and Lisa too. They weren't done with me. Not yet. I ignored the first few calls. But eventually, I answered one, too exhausted to resist. It was Mom. Emily, she began, her voice soft, filled with that all too familiar tone of guilt and manipulation. Please, you can't just leave us like this. You know we didn't mean it that way. I felt my anger flare. Didn't mean it that way? They had planned it. They had made their decision. I wasn't going to let them make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. I'm done, Mom, I said, my voice calm but firm. I've done enough. I've given enough. You've made your choice. You're being dramatic, she snapped, her voice hardening. You owe us. Emily, you're our daughter. Family sticks together. Family, the word that had been wielded like a weapon all these years. It was always about family. Wasn't it? But what about my family? The one that had used me, abused my loyalty, and taken everything I had to give without a second thought. What about the family I had tried so desperately to hold together? No, Mom, I said, the words tasting bitter as I spoke them. It's not about family anymore. It's about respect, and you've shown me none. I hung up before she could say another word, my heart pounding in my chest. I had never felt so much clarity. Yes, the decision was hard, but it was right. I was done being their ATM. Done being their emotional support. From now on, my life was mine. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into staying in a toxic cycle anymore. But even as I stood firm in my decision, the guilt gnawed at me. How could I just walk away from everything I had known? From the people who had raised me, who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The reality was too much to face all at once. But I had no choice now. I had made my decision. And now, I had to live with it. Days passed in a blur. I buried myself in work, finding solace in the predictable rhythms of meetings, deadlines, and project plans. It felt easier to focus on anything but the emotional mess I had left behind. But no matter how hard I worked, the ache in my chest never fully faded. It would take time, but the one thing I knew for sure, I was never going back. Then came the texts, the calls, the manipulation. They didn't stop. The first one came the day after I canceled the payments, my mother, begging me to reconsider, saying how much they needed me. But all I felt was anger. They had shown me who they were. They didn't care about me. They just wanted what I could give. By the time I blocked their numbers, I realized something. This wasn't just about money. It was about my life. It was about reclaiming myself, my dignity, and my right to live without the weight of their expectations on my shoulders. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary, and no matter how much they tried to guilt me, I would never go back. I had freed myself, and that was worth more than anything they could ever offer. Weeks passed, and slowly, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The chaos of my family's demands had been replaced with a quiet solitude that was both comforting and unfamiliar. I had walked away from the emotional and financial chains that had bound me for so long. But the weight of that decision still lingered in my chest. It was freeing, yes, but it was also isolating. The silence from my family was deafening at first. And the only sound I could hear was my own thoughts, reminding me of what I had lost. Work became both a distraction and a refuge. Bennett Construction, the company I had worked for over the last few years, had been a steady source of stability throughout my tumultuous relationship with my family. The job demanded long hours and attention to detail, but it had always been a place where I could lose myself in something that didn't come with emotional baggage. The latest project, an upscale medical office complex in Sacramento, was no different. I poured myself into it, overseeing the blueprints, managing client meetings, and pushing through deadlines like I always did. But this time, something had changed within me. There was no more guilt fueling my work. No more urgency to prove my worth to people who didn't appreciate me. I was doing this for myself now. But even in the comfort of my professional success, the emptiness never fully disappeared. My family's absence was a sharp, gnawing pain, like an old wound that refused to heal. Every now and then, memories of dinners with my parents, laughing around the table, would creep into my thoughts, only to be overshadowed by the stark reality of how they had treated me. I didn't regret walking away, but the loss of what I had hoped my family could be was still raw. It was on one of those quiet evenings, when the loneliness felt like it might swallow me whole, that Aunt Carol called. She had always been the one family member who seemed to understand me. The one who had never judged my choices or tried to manipulate my emotions. She had always been there, even when things were difficult at home, offering her love without expecting anything in return. "I've been hearing a lot of things, Emily," she said softly on the other end of the line, her voice a comforting balm against the coldness that had settled in my heart. "I just wanted to check in. I know it's been tough." Her words made something break inside me, like a dam finally giving way to the flood of emotions I had been holding back. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that someone understood. That someone truly cared without strings attached. "I don't know if I did the right thing, Aunt Carol," I confessed, my voice shaky. "I'm trying to move on. But it's harder than I thought. I keep wondering if I made a mistake." She was quiet for a moment, then replied with a wisdom that soothed my soul. "You didn't make a mistake, sweetheart. Sometimes, walking away from the people who are supposed to love you is the hardest thing you'll ever do. But it's the only way you can find yourself again. You've given so much of yourself to them. It's time to give that love back to you." Her words hit me with the force of a truth I had been too afraid to face. I had been so focused on trying to make my family proud, on doing everything they asked of me, that I had lost sight of myself. It was time to stop being the person they wanted me to be and start being the person I wanted to be. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a decision based solely on what I wanted. I booked a 2-week trip to Italy, something I had always dreamed of doing but had put off time and time again because of the guilt I felt toward my family. I had been so consumed by their needs that I had forgotten to live for myself. This trip would be my declaration of independence, my way of showing myself that I deserved to take up space in the world. 2. The day I boarded the plane to Florence, I felt a mixture of excitement and fear. This was new territory for me, doing something solely for my own joy, without worrying about how it might affect anyone else. The freedom was intoxicating, and with every mile that took me further from my past, I could feel myself shedding the layers of guilt and obligation that had held me captive for so long. In Italy, I wandered through the cobbled streets of Florence, savoring the beauty of the architecture, the food, and the culture. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. I didn't have to worry about calls from my parents or siblings asking for help. I didn't have to feel guilty about taking time for myself. I was just me. And that was enough. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were moments when the weight of the past would catch up with me. Moments when I missed the idea of family, what it should have been. But each day, I grew a little stronger. A little more certain that I had made the right choice. This was my life now. And no matter how hard it had been to walk away, I knew in my heart that it was the only way to reclaim my own happiness. As the days passed, I found myself growing more comfortable in my newfound independence. The memories of my family, the love I had once hoped for, faded slowly into the background, replaced by the warmth of my own achievements. The trip to Italy had been more than just a vacation, it had been a turning point. I had rediscovered myself, the woman I had forgotten while drowning in the expectations of others. I returned home to find a world that felt different, lighter. The weight of my family's demands no longer hung over me. The silence that had once felt oppressive now felt like a peaceful absence. A space where I could breathe freely and be true to who I was. I had reclaimed my life. And with that came a sense of freedom I had never known before. But life has a way of teaching you lessons. And this was no exception. The choice to stand up for myself had not been easy. But it had been the most important one I had ever made. I had learned that sometimes, walking away is the only way to find your way back to yourself. I could finally see the truth clearly. I wasn't selfish for choosing my own happiness. I was strong, brave, and deserving of love, not for what I could give, but for who I was. I had learned the hard way that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by those who truly see your worth. And with that, I moved forward, not looking back, embracing the life I had made for myself. Because sometimes, the greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to choose your own path. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to follow more inspiring life stories.